We'll start off by reflecting on Man City's 2-1 victory over Bournemouth in the FA Cup last weekend. I think many, maybe before kick-off, questioned Guardiola's starting lineup when you had De Bruyne, Gundogan, Kovacic and Bernardo Silva all handed starts in, what looked quite a slow and old midfield. And I think City maybe initially struggled to find the rhythm in that first half, and they went into the break behind against Bournemouth. But Guardiola worked his magic at the break by sending on Nico O'Reilly. He had such an impact in that game, and City eventually turned the game around thanks to second half goals from Mamouche and Haaland, who of course made amends after missing his first half penalty. And City are through to the seventh successive FA Cup semi-final, which is some achievement. So, how do you assess City's performance overall, Stephen, and the comeback against Bournemouth?
Yeah, seven in a row, by the way, really is remarkable. And with all due respect to Bournemouth, they were trying to get there for the first time, which shows just how hard it is to do that. And obviously, City's resources vastly outstrip Bournemouth, but it's an incredible achievement. And Guardiola's right to play that up, I reckon, because you were saying it beforehand in the press conference we did how big it would be. And I honestly didn't think we'd get there when I saw that lineup as well. It felt strange, actually, which sort of shows why we're sat here and he's sat there earning millions of pounds because this guy knows what he's doing. But it did feel strange for Guardiola to go back to the scene of arguably the most heinous crime this season, where we were sort of played off the park by Bournemouth back in November, and essentially did the same thing again, which is actually, in hindsight, an incredibly bold move. You can see why he did it because he was sort of getting them to rectify their mistakes. But it did feel like, and Guardiola's been telling us for months now, that City's main problem has been maybe the age, the demographic of the squad, the lack of physicality, the lack of energy, and afterwards, Guardiola was talking also about maybe a lack of hunger, which comes from age, comes from maybe gorging on too much success. And so to me, when I looked at that lineup, and given how City played in recent weeks with the inclusion of Marmoush and Nico Gonzalez and, the likes of Savino, Doku, a much younger average age for the team, to go back to De Bruyne, Kovacic, Bernardo Silva, Gundogan, Foden on the left again, rolling back a few years, it felt strange. And I'm being honest, I didn't get it at all. It felt like the Bournemouth game early in November is when City were really ran off the park and where our weaknesses were truly exposed by a side simply fitter, younger, hungrier, and more organised than us. And Bournemouth are, they've been a revelation this season. They're one of the best sides in the league, and it did feel like Guardiola, I was like, what is he doing? What's the plan here? Because it doesn't really make sense to essentially put what he perceives as our weaknesses back in the fray, and saying this is our problems this season. We're going with these sides again, and we'd spent months struggling, with this setup. Ultimately, he was justified, and I think the plan was probably to get those guys to get through with experience, and then bring on the younger guys towards the end, which he did with the array of substitutions towards the end, and. I think as well, I actually felt we were justified winners in the end. And I know the first half was a little bit frustrating, but City still probably should have been ahead at half time. The big chances. Haaland on a different day has a hat trick in that first half. Look, the header wasn't easy, but he scores that in other years, especially his debut season. He definitely scores a penalty in the 1-on-1. So, look, even though it didn't feel like the most fluid of football, I can only really call, one or two chances for Bournemouth in that first half, despite the frustrations. And the goal came from, yet again, another Manchester City mistake, shooting ourselves in the foot with Nunes far too sloppy on the ball and then caught at the back post as well. So it was a frustrating first half, but we still probably should have been ahead. Fortunately, the substitutions turned it around, and I think City were excellent in that second half, like truly excellent. I think there was for the fans of the stat, zero XG accumulated for Bournemouth in that second half, which essentially meant they had zero shots on goal and no dangerous situations whatsoever, which is remarkable in a way for a team that hungry looking for their first ever FA Cup. So, yeah, I thought overall, on the balance of it, I think City deserved it. I think it was a composed display. I think it's what you wanted from that midfield. It was experienced. It maybe wasn't as magical as Pete Gundogan, David Silva, De Bruyne, but they played like men. They played like leaders with experience, and I actually enjoyed it. And I think that when the dust settles today on the game a little bit more, I think the fans will probably take it in and realize how good that performance was. You could tell Guardiola loved it as well at the end because he was delighted.
Yeah, Guardiola, you could really tell what it meant to Guardiola. It was sort of an aggressive celebration from him with
Yeah,
the Marmoush goal, and then at full time as well, full of emotion. And
I think he felt justified, didn't he, for
yeah,
trusting his men again, if that makes sense.
yeah, relied on those senior players from the starting lineup. But and he's he was full of praise for every player really, the whole squad, even the subs. But the the one that stands out really is the impact of O'Reilly off the bench. It's just he really loves playing in the FA Cup, doesn't he, this season? I think that's three
Player of the
goals.
tournament, probably.
Yeah, 3 goals, 2 assists, and now 2 Man of the Match awards received for him across 4 games. He's just excelled playing in this left wing back, so well, not left wing back, but advanced left
Yeah.
back role, hasn't he, for City?
Yeah, brilliant stuff. I mean, there's not many things more sweeter, regardless of the level of the team you support, than seeing a local lad. I don't know if he's a City fan, but he's definitely from Manchester, and they're definitely in his blood and in his heart because he's been there since he was about 8 years old. So seeing this lifelong blue, and I mean that in terms of literally been playing for City since he was a child, essentially inspire your team to a Wembley trip. Yeah, it's everything as a football fan. We've been spoiled as City fans over the past, decade or two, with glorious international superstars and brilliant footballers. But there's still a piece of me as a local Manchester lad, as a lifelong City fan who sees these young lads coming through, and I can't help but smile because they're living the dream that we want, as football fans, and it does mean a lot to me, and it does mean more. To quote Liverpool, it does mean more when you see these academy lads in the side, and I think we've been waiting for this moment for Nico O'Reilly, and there's been a lot of frustration around his progression or lack of this season, given that Guardiola leaned on him quite heavily during pre-season. And obviously, the context is needed for Nico O'Reilly. He isn't a left back. He's not even a defensive midfielder or number 8. He was typically either a striker or a false 9 or 10 for the academy side. So essentially, a very central, very forward player. And Guardiola, looked at him, saw the profile for ridiculously big. Like, he's a giant. This guy. He's like 6'5". Had an inch or two with his hair as well. He's massive. A really big lad. He's strong. He's athletic. He looks like physically, the way he'll grow out will be very Patrick Vieira-esque in terms of his physique, like big, leggy, elegant runner that can bulldoze past people. But Guardiola saw him and decided, you know what, with his skill set that he's got, he could probably play in the centre of the park a little bit deeper and dominate games. And I really liked that decision. There was some indications that Nico O'Reilly didn't fully believe he could play that role from Guardiola himself, with some quotes said, I'm not sure he thinks he can do it. But I think Guardiola's right to push it. Like, my favorite ever tactical thing that Guardiola's done since joining City is when he turns creative players into more complete players. I'm a firm believer that you can't teach a number 6 traditionally to be a great playmaker. I don't think you can. I think you either have that magic or not. But I think you can make a great creative player run harder and work harder. He did that with David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne, and he turned him into false 8s. And I think he's looking at Nico O'Reilly right now and thinking that this guy, he's already very creative. He scored some great goals for the academy sides. He's very good passer, great feet. But if he learns to defend as well, he could be the complete midfielder and have so much more tools. And obviously the left back role is a big part of that. And he's had a couple of good performances in the FA Cup. And I've been waiting to see a little bit more from him. And I think Guardiola, he's always relies on senior experience. But I think now Nico O'Reilly's just made himself indispensable in terms of the squad option. You cannot see that performance and ignore it. It's too hard. And there was a quote afterwards from Guardiola when he said, I'm going to paraphrase again here, but he implied that, the one thing he loves about young players is that they're fearless. But I've always felt, I'm paraphrasing again, he said he's always felt that you don't put them in the pressure cooker situations because it's a lot to lean on. But he said, but I might be wrong. And I think there's a realization from Guardiola that actually I need to stop mollycoddling these players and just trust them because they're fearless, these young lads. And I think Guardiola's right in theory about not throwing the young lads at the deep end, but there might be a switch to realize that these lads are already in at the deep end at their age. They play for Manchester City. With all due respect, the expectations on a City Academy player is so much higher than it is on a Walsall Academy player or whatever, because maybe that's harsh, but you know what I mean? But the standards are the highest because they are some of the best young footballers in the world. So I think these guys are at City at that age because they have that mentality. So they probably won't sink, if you throw them in the deep end. So yeah, I think Nico O'Reilly was excellent. I can't wait to see his development. He's got everything. He's massive. He's strong. He bullied Semenyo, and that's not easy to do. He's pushing him off the ball, in that second half. The energy bombarding forward, the decision making, the cross is beautiful. And I've been crying out for an overlapping fullback. He's not that in the traditional sense, but that's what an overlapping fullback does. Getting forward, putting the cross to the back post, great footwork to win the ball, and then free Marmoush for the goal as well. Yeah, he put City on his shoulders and carried us to the semi-finals. It was a real breakout performance, I think, with Nico O'Reilly, and I think one that Guardiola now and Hugo Viana, when they plan the squad for next season, will find it possible to ignore. I love it.
Yeah, it was, really, really impressive from him. He seemed to win almost every tackle, so such a threat going forward. And Yeah, he's. I think it's good as well that the previous three games were against lower league opposition, but he's really proved himself against a really good Bournemouth side, a Premier
Yeah,
League side that were pushing
high
to
level.
win themselves. Yeah, exactly. So he's he's really elevated his game in that one, and Guardiola said as well that he's going to play in some way in that semi-final.
Didn't say how many minutes did he?
No, he didn't. But
He will.
he trusts him a little bit more now, I think. And obviously that semi-final that City have got now at Wembley is at the end of April against Forest. So how tough is that one going to be for City?
Yeah, well, look, Forest are a cracking side. We all know that. And once again, they are staring down an FA Cup final, which is not something they've had for I don't know when, but I presume it was decades ago. That would be massive for them. And we've got something to prove against Forest. They beat us 1-0 very recently. A game that City was very, very, very even. Hudson-Odoi with a sort of a late dagger there. I think City is that Forest, isn't it, as well? I think.
Well, the
Yeah, it's
semi-finals will be at Wembley this
Oh
one,
yeah, sorry,
semi-finals,
miles
yeah.
away, half asleep still. No, absolutely, it's a neutral ground. Well, the Etihad South, as City fans love to call it. Um, and we've already seen, if you want to talk about Nico O'Reilly, he was great in the Community Shield game this season. So he's already played there. He's already been great in the centre of the pitch. And yeah, I think Forest, look, they're going to be up for this. City on neutral territory, a ground that City are exceptionally familiar with, go there every season. And I think there's something to prove after that Forest game. And I'm hoping this season look isn't really rescuable as such, by the standards of City. But look, there's no way that 90% of teams in the country, probably 99% of the teams, wouldn't walk away with Champions League football and FA Cup we've offered to them. And City could get that this season. And despite everything, if we can get an FA Cup victory in the bag and get Champions League football, while also overseeing a rebuild, it'll be a decent season. It genuinely will be. And I'm hoping that, the game yesterday, when you see, the likes of Gundogan, who's had a really tough season, to be honest, and Bernardo Silva as well, even De Bruyne by his standards, they were good. They led from the front. I'm hoping this could be a sort of line in the sand moment where, everyone's back together mentally. Because Guardiola very interestingly talked after the game about how this wasn't this was the players rediscovering their soul and their passion again. He said, before the game, these fans have travelled 5.5 hours, to this game. We cannot play like we did in November. Quite beautifully, he compared it to. He said we played in flip flops in November. So like he said, they were essentially on the beach strolling around, and he wanted to see that hunger to win again because as much as these guys are older, um, energy and wanting it is everything in football. He said it's not about tactics. He said it's a little bit of tactics, but it's about that soul again. And he said he saw his team, and I'm hoping this game could be the spark because we've gone back to one of the scenes of the biggest crimes this season, and we fixed it. I would argue, and with some key players to come back as well. So yeah, I think the Forest. I I'm more confident because we've been beaten by them recently. If that makes sense, I think there is very obvious errors to fix there, and because we've seen that performance from the older players, and we've seen the energy as well from the younger players when they came on. Mamouche with the winner, Nico O'Reilly changing the game, Nico Gonzalez and McAtee coming on and helping see the game out. I think I feel positive today. I feel positive because even though the season's been difficult. We've seen that some of these older guys have still got it. We've seen the younger guys can change the game, and we've fixed one of the big problems of the season. Not fixed it. We've sort of had a bit of a redemption arc, and Forest is another chance to do the same. And we know how they play. Everyone does, but we got experience at Wembley, so I'm hoping that'll be enough.